It's really amazing to be talking to you, Julie, today. You are a curator of stories, you are an editor, you are a writer, you are an educator. Could you please introduce yourself and explain your business?
Certainly. My name is Julie Saeger, Nierenberg. I use all of my names because I like to use my maiden name as well as my married name because I like to draw attention to that family name, and it was very important to me to do so when I published my first book. And I have a focus in much of my writing, which people might find a bit odd, but for me, it's been very purposeful. And that focus is death and grief and bereavement. And the reason I got involved in that, the reason I became inspired to have that purpose was that I spent the last months and weeks and days, much of them with my father before he passed away in 2012. And
sorry for that, Julie.
Thank you. And he knew that I was a writer and that I worked on many other stories. I worked on publishing family diaries and things like that. And he encouraged me while I was with him at this time of his life. He encouraged me. He said, write about us, write about this. And I said, okay, I'll do it. So I'm going to jump ahead. I may go back there in a little bit, but what happened for me is after he passed away, at first I kind of felt like I was in a bubble of almost like time had stood still, and not that I wasn't sad, but I don't know, I felt somehow uplifted and very connected to my father. And I even had a very vivid dream a few days after he passed. I dreamed that he came back to me and took me on an interstellar, trip, and that our light bodies had a fun time. And I imagined him, it was very meaningful, that dream. And I imagined him enjoying where he was, So at any rate, what happened for me, though, is about 6 weeks after he died, we were very, very close. And all of a sudden, it was like that little bubble feeling had fallen away. And I totally got it that he was gone and I was still here. I kind of felt left behind, which was very strange for me because I very much wanted to stay in this life. I was married and I have 2 adult children with whom I'm very close. It wasn't that I had a death wish, but I liked that little trip that we took together, and if nothing else in my mind, and I felt left behind, and I felt overcome by what I call a tsunami of grief. I was very, very bereaved. And being the writer that I am, what I decided to do is write a journal, starting that day that I began to feel that so dramatically. And every few days, or maybe it would be a week, I would write a little bit in my journal. And what I did was I chose to tell myself in the journal the story of what happened, how we learned that he was, that he had cancer, and when we learned that that there was nothing more they could do to treat it. That was actually 3 years after his diagnosis. And then I wrote about, a little bit at a time, I wrote about how it was to be with him in his presence in his last days and hours. And I held his hand as he died. And it was very, very meaningful to me to have participated in that. So by writing this all in my journal, I got a new perspective on that. I realized what a gift that had been. And instead of feeling so bad about being left behind, I began to take his words very much to heart. And I wrote the whole story, which is it actually only takes about an hour to read the whole book. Most people say. Some of them say they have to take a break and get a box of tissues. But it's a very short little book, and many have said to me that it's like a how-to book for conscious dying. And the reason they say that is not because of anything I did in particular. I was just willing to be there, to be with my father. The amazing thing, the amazing part of this whole experience was him. So his background, he was a social worker all his life. And I believe that helped him very much to be in a very good frame of mind when he died. But he did very, very important. He took each one of his children and his wife, my stepmother, and with us individually, he made peace. He gave us an opportunity to speak to any issues that we might have with him. I had no issues with my dad. I was just so happy that he was my dad. You know, he was the best dad ever. But he even said to me when I told him that, he said, "Oh, you know," I said, "You're the best. You know, you're perfect." He said, No. I made many mistakes." But I was able to say to him, "Yes, and those mistakes showed me how to do the same. Everybody makes mistakes, but what do you do with that? How do you grow from that?" Anyway, so he said, it was interesting because he said, we had this whole talk one day, and the next day he wanted to say those things again. It was very important. He said, "You know, you're my very special Julie," and he had 4 children. I'm sure he said the same, you know, thing to each of them. And there's nobody else like you. And he said, "My love is eternal. You know, love is everlasting." And he believed that God, what he called God, is love, that eternal love is the essence of God. And so he voiced those things, and he said that. And anyway, I considered that time with him just a very special gift. And so after I wrote this little journal and experienced the healing benefit of doing that, people who read parts of it said, "Oh, you've got to publish this." And I'm a self-publisher anyway, so it was very easy to do. So then after that, I said to myself, what am I going to do with the book now that it's published? You know, I gave copies to my family. I decided that I would reach out to grief and bereavement professionals, to nurses and doctors and psychologists, and anyone, you know, doulas, anyone who is involved in the death and dying process, or in giving support to those who, you know, are left behind. And I started to reach out to people in those roles, and the book was very well received. Much of the time I send complimentary copies that they can lend to their clients or put into their library or whatever. But because of that, so I started that habit, that little bit every few days. I'd reach out primarily through LinkedIn. That was wonderful for that. And what happened was people started sending me their stories, one after another. In my mailbox, I'd get books from people who they had their own story, and also emails. Every time I opened up my computer to look at my emails, there was another little, I call them gifts, from someone about their experience, or they were telling me how impactful my little book was. I had people tell me that it had been 20 years since their parents died, but only after reading my book were they able to really, you know, click with the meaning of letting go and why they hadn't really finished grieving and so forth. Anyway, so I don't think there is any, by the way, any finishing grieving. For me, grief, when you lose someone, you don't really lose them, but it's establishing a relationship with that loss, and it's integrating the grief into my life. That's what I've done, and I believe that's helped me develop as a human being. And anyway, so long story short, because of that little book, I met Victoria Brewster, who is a social worker in Montreal. I didn't really meet her. We just connected over the internet, and we had a phone call. She really felt that we were of the same, cut from the same cloth in terms of how we felt about furthering the conversation around death in our culture, in our communities, and finding more comfort with that. So Victoria worked with very elderly people. So for them and for her, it was quite common to need to embrace the dying. So after we talked, we decided, I said, Victoria, I've got tons of things people have already sent me. So what we did is we decided to write a book. And so we've written most of the chapter. No, let me change that. We wrote, of all the contributors, she and I wrote more chapters than any single person. But there are 54 contributors to this book. And okay, I'm going to take a brief second here, because this little book I wrote, you can see how, it's very, very small. It's called Daddy, This Is It, Being with My Dying Dad. I always called him Daddy, so that's why. And this is what Victoria and I worked on. We worked on this book for 4 years. And then and this one, you can see how it's a big book. We feel very proud of it. It is a compilation of so many wonderful stories, both from lay people and from professionals who work in the field. And so that's kind of how I got around to doing that. I'm doing all the talking. It's your turn, Nour.
It's fantastic. Like, it's an inspirational thought and an inspirational journey. But let's get back to the beginning. Could you explain your story with your family name?
Yeah. So my father's. So here's my. Yeah, you can't see it on here, but Julie Saeger. Saeger was my maiden name. It was my father's name. And I just wanted to carry that on in my publishing. So I just made a decision that I was going to use that as a middle name whenever I publish a book. So that's the story behind the name. It's a German name. It means woodcutter, sawyer, woodcutter, Saeger. Yeah.
And does it have any connotations, any like implied meanings in your life?
Not so much. It's just that it, my grandfather was a writer, and I've published. He was a translator also. He translated from the German into English. I've published 2 of the books that he translated, and anyway, I just wanted to carry on the family name, so I chose to use all these names, and they're long names: Saeger, Nierenberg. It's kind of a mouthful, but it was just my choice. Nierenberg was my first married name. I was married to Dr. Nierenberg for 25 years, and my 2 daughters have that name, so I wanted to keep it. So when I was remarried, I moved to Canada and met my husband here and lived here with him until his death in 2018. I didn't take his last name because I wanted to keep the same last name as my daughters. So anyway.
Fantastic. So let's go to the journey in part by part. You mentioned like it was like a bubble of grief.
Yeah.
Could you explain a little more what this means?
So I briefly described to you that I had this vision dream. That was when it kind of, I felt that it really started. It changed my perceptions. So I felt that my father's essence, his I call it light body because that's how I visualized him, was a light. And I felt that he, reached out to me, and I took the form of my own essence, my own light body, and the two of us, we went on a fantastic journey. We saw the whole universe, and we went inside teeny, teeny, tiny things to the, the tiniest subatomic level and the biggest, universal level. And we went forward and backward in time. And in my dream, there was no time. It's like it went on forever. And the reason I woke up, at the time I woke up from the dream, what woke me was I became extremely convinced in that moment. I felt joy so strongly that I thought if I continued feeling that degree of joy, that I would die. I felt that my human body would cease to exist because I could not contain the joy. It was the most, people talk about the rapture. I have no idea, what that might, this is my experience. I already experienced something that might be like the rapture. It's a rapturous, joyful feeling. So when I woke up, firstly, I couldn't get back to sleep. I, had all these vivid memories, and so the bubble, to answer your question, I felt like at that point I was enclosed in a bubble of joy, love, the eternal love that my father had expressed in words, the love that is, in my belief, the essence of all that is, which is, to me, that's God. That's what the source is. It's the love is the is the essence, and joy is what makes up the universe. I came away believing that, and so my perception of the world, my day-to-day perceptions were very different. So when I looked at green things, it happened to be springtime. The green seemed to be just vibrating, pulsing with life. And if I saw a bird go overhead, I could project my own perception to be in the bird's position, looking down. I was at my daughter's soccer game, and I was sitting there, and when I let myself kind of go into this, it's like I was watching from the bird's eye view, but the soccer game was happening. Very strange. I know I sound like a woo-woo, but those were the kind of things that were going on for me when I first, after this, shortly after the death. And I think it was 4 days after he died when that dream thing happened. And it was like that. And then gradually it just kind of dissipated. My perceptions became more normal. And like I said, about 6 weeks into that time frame, I realized I'm same old me now. I'm not experiencing that anymore. And it's not that I can't go back there in my mind, but it's not the same. So I don't know what that is. It's I've heard a lot of people have different perceptions around death, that the veil thins, or, they have different names for that. I don't know anything about that. I'm just speaking from my own experience, which was profoundly, I felt very profoundly changed by that, because my perception of the afterlife, I don't even think of it as the afterlife. I think of it's all happening all the time, whether we're aware of it or not. That's what is. So.
Yeah, fantastic. So let's get to another point. You mentioned like your audience mentioned conscious death.
Yeah.
What does that mean? Could you explain a little more on that?
Sure. So I'll just tell you what it means for me. Other people might have a different take on it. For me, it means when the dying person, hopefully, and especially the people who can be consciously with that person, are able to relate in whatever ways they feel a want or a need. For my father, the need he felt was to give each child a chance to say anything we might want to say, or to ask him anything we might want to, might want to know, or just to be able to have that opening. And he was in a state of mind where he could do that. Many people are not at their end of life. I felt that was such a gift to him and to us. Right at the very end, he was not so talkative, but it was, right up till about the very last day or day and a half, he was able to verbalize those things. And it was, for me, that's a conscious death. We also had discussed how he wanted to be treated in the last days and hours, and he wanted to be as awake and aware as he could be. So some people might not want that. They might prefer to be medicated, but he was not in the hospital. He was able to be in his it was a long-term care, or maybe it was a hospice supported care home that he was in at the very end. And unfortunately, his wife, my stepmother, was also ill, but she was in the very next room, and every day they would bring her. She got permission from her doctor to be upright in a chair for 1 hour a day. So they would bring her in to be at his side. So, they didn't get to be I actually got to be with him, a lot more than she did. And my sister as well. My sister was also able to be there. But it was, so for me, being conscious dying it can partly be something that you create long before you die. In my opinion, the ideal situation, and it's not that I've done all these things yet, but I'm working on it. The ideal situation is that you get all your, what I call ducks in a row. You get all your, all the factors that you need to take care of, your last will and testament, your powers of attorney for healthcare and for financial, and hopefully your advanced directives or living will, whatever you want to call that you describe ideally what you would like at your end of life. Many people don't want to be hospitalized for any reason. They definitely may not want any kinds of procedures done on them that would end up leaving them on a respirator or whatever. And Nour, at this time, oh my gosh, at this time of the pandemic, with all these, severe respiratory symptoms that the COVID patients are getting, I've just had a lot of questions about, I wonder what people are creating for their advanced directives, because they just don't know what that's going to be like. Whereas in other circumstances, we might be able to make some pretty clear choices around that. I hope they can still feel some sense of, for me, it's a kind of it's partly integrity, and that you have some sense of control over how that's going to go. Anyway, and so that, for me, that's part of conscious dying. you know, getting ready. And that doesn't mean that you're sitting around going, la, 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 you know, I'm just waiting, you know, it's going to happen. It's not that part, but maybe if you've been told you only have a matter of months or weeks or days. Yeah. So in 17, in the summer of 2017, my husband received a diagnosis of pancreatic cancer, which in most cases is terminal. And so, and he was already in stage 4. And that's the problem with pancreatic cancer. Most often when they find it, it's already advanced because it's not easy to find. Someday they'll come up with a system, you know, a better way to find that and treat that earlier. But in my husband's case, it was quite advanced when they figured it out. So we were told he probably lives anywhere from 6 to 12 months, even doing chemotherapy, and he wasn't qualified for surgery because it had spread some. So at any rate, I guess where I'm going with this is we had time to prepare, and I think considering the condition he was in, you know, we did the very best we could. His daughter, 2 daughters out of his 3 daughters live here in Toronto also. I live in Toronto in Canada, and they you know, they lent a lot of support. His younger daughter, Sherry, is a lawyer, and she was going to be his executrix. And so he spent, you know, many hours with her talking about things that he, you know, wanted her to know, and that hopefully would help her in that role. That's all for him. That was part of the conscious dying process. You know, it was more about, you know, how do you take care of this or that, or the financial, but it was and for him, it was important that we try and do that in the best way possible. But I will say that even though we had all those weeks and months and knew it, we still weren't as ready in as regards all the ducks in a row as we would have liked to have been. There were things that would have been much better taken care of long before this, you know, became his reality. So I encourage people, and some say anyone over the age of 18 should have their will and powers of attorney, and they should revisit it every year, because life circumstances change. And when something changes as far as significant people in your life, or, you know, you have a family, or you marry, or you divorce, whatever those things are, any of those things, when those circumstances change, they most of the time they invalidate the will. You've got to get a new revised will to take care of those circumstances. And it's important to do that, because then your loved ones are not left with, you know, a really terrible mess on their hands. It's hard enough when everything is very much in order. It's hard enough to deal with that. And I was very thankful that Earl's daughter was actually the one to take care of those things. It's been, let's see, he died in March of 2018. Here we are in August of 2020, and she's still working with those, with, you know, taking care of the paperwork, the legal work, the distribution of assets and that sort of thing. Yeah. So it's conscious. I think conscious dying would mean something different to every person. If a person had a very strong religious belief, they might want to have, you know, a priest, or I don't know, rabbi, or, you know, somebody in that role that, I don't know what to call all the various, you know, different religious leaders, what to name them. But it might be very important to the dying person or to their family. Could be the immediate family, to have that person there visiting, maybe even at the time of death, or at least so that the dying person could feel that they had done everything that they needed to do to be ready to pass on. Yeah.
Yeah, yeah. So let's go to other people's experiences. Some people would choose to mourn someone forever.
Yeah.
What do you say to that?
Firstly, there's no one right way to do grief and mourning. I think it's unfortunate that our predominant Western culture has the habit, I don't know what else to call it, of encouraging people to get over it. It's been 6 weeks, get over it. People will say things that I don't think they have any idea what the impact is, especially for people who lose a child. It's kind of, you've probably heard it said, that's the unnatural order of things. When your parent passes away, you kind of expect that's what's going to happen. The grandparent, you think that's the natural order of things, of the cycle of life. But when someone loses a child, in whatever circumstances, whether it's because of a genetic disease, or whatever the situation, even if the child is a stillbirth, people in our culture are not open to accepting that the parents often they're gonna feel that grief and that loss for the rest of their lives. Does that mean they're not okay? No, it doesn't mean that. They're choosing to perhaps be open with that grief that they feel, and other people don't know what to do with that. It's very difficult for other people who haven't lost a child to be with a person who has. They don't know what to say. And I'll give a little tip about that, since I brought it up. The people who have lost children, who have had a death, they would like for those who are trying to support them to be able to acknowledge that, and to be able to say the name of the child, to not act like it didn't, like the child never existed, and they're afraid to bring up anything about the child. Those people like to hear that others remember their child, that the child had an impact on them, that they were loved and remembered, and it's so those things. There are many authors who've learned from their own experiences and gathered ideas about how we can help support people in maybe the particular situations, like someone who's committed suicide. Those sorts of situations that seem to be the hardest for the general public to acknowledge, and they're bewildered about how do we support this person. There are a lot of resources out there that can help anyone interested, and I would encourage people to do that. One of the stories in this book that Vicki and I put together is written by a man whose daughter succeeded in committing suicide by jumping from the what's the San Francisco bridge, the famous one.
Yeah, from the bridge. From the bridge.
Yeah, from the bridge. And unfortunately, there are many people who commit suicide jumping off that bridge. And this was his only daughter. And so, it's very hard for he and his wife, and for their friends, the friends of the daughter, but they created something positive out of that. The daughter's friends get together every year at the holiday time, with the parents of the girl that died. And they have kind of a remembrance and kind of a party and remember her, and, you know, just bring up good thoughts. And it allows the parents to know what those girls are doing as they grow through life. You know, they're getting married, they're going to university, they have children. It allows them to participate in that circle of a community that they created, that's probably more meaningful and tight than it might have been had she lived. You know, they might have not kept up with all those girls, but those girls made a commitment to be there for them. And I believe, in addition, there's that the writer of that chapter mentions that there's a support group for people whose loved ones have jumped off the bridge. Golden Gate Bridge, that's the name of it. I couldn't think of it. Yeah. Anyway, so, and that's one of the good things. I think my purpose that evolved out of this, it's not the only thing I do. I have other editing and writing projects and books that I've written, and so forth. It's not the only thing that I do, but I feel very strongly about being an advocate for for our culture, being more open about grief and bereavement, being more comfortable with death and dying. And I think that if we practice that, we get better at it. And there are many different resources. Here in Toronto, every so often there's a meeting of a group called Death Cafe. Mm-hmm. And this organization has meetings all around the world. You can find them in different places. And it's just a venue where people can get together. It's not a grief support venue, but to talk about death and dying and just whatever comes up. It's not, there's no program. The program is tea and cakes, you know, but the people who established those meetings did so to encourage people to gain a new level of comfort around those topics. And I'm encouraged to see that. And, you know, there are many other situations like that. Yeah.
So you mentioned like turning these moments or these hard moments into positive thoughts or into positive actions. How easy or how difficult this is?
That's a very hard, I can't generalize about that, Nour. It's a great question. For me, it seemed relatively easy because the way that I kind of slipped into that was I did something that I benefited from. When I wrote that journal and I read it each time I sat down to write something, I read the previous part of it. So by the time I finished it, I'd read the thing, 100 times. And it became easy for me to think back about each step of that and feel very comfortable with it. And I recommend that to anybody who might feel stuck in their grief. Sometimes people feel they're in a stuck place. I recommend write it down, write about it, every day, write everything that you feel. This book is not all about happy thoughts. It's what I really went through. And yes, there's some happiness in there, and there's a lot of love in there, but it's also deeply meaningful in a grieving sense. So how easy is it to do that? I think it might be easier for some people than others, but I know many stories, and a lot of them are included in this anthology book that Vicki and I published, about people who never had anything to do. I'm one of those, never had anything to do with the death and dying business until they lost someone very precious to them. and it changed their life purpose. And they began to, some of them created businesses that they, they learned to find a way to help other people who were experiencing similar situations. How easy is that? I don't know that it's easy, but it's for me, I guess it's kind of like childbirth. It's not easy. Is it worthwhile? You betcha. It's wonderful. You tend to forget the pain and look at the beautiful result. It's I think that in our lives, we have many opportunities to take what might be considered adverse circumstances and turn them into something profoundly beautiful and useful to other people. And I mentioned earlier that so many people sent me their stories. The books that are written about other people's situations and what they went through there's just an amazing number of good books out there that, mine's just, ours is just, are just two of the many, yes. So it, for some people, it might be quite easy because maybe they're already doing something, that might be kind of a similar role. For others, it's a complete change of life purpose, and they might totally leave what they were doing before and start doing something else. There have been many funds, that have been set up to, that people donate to, and the grants that are given to hospices. Lots of those organizations that make those things possible happen because people who had their own death circumstances wanted to create something for other people. So to me, death, the topic of death and dying can be one of the most inspirational things. And I believe that if people really look at that in their own life circumstances, it can help us to live more freely and appreciate every day, be grateful for everything we have, our health, our families, our opportunities. And it just, if you get it in mind that every one of us is going to die, we don't really know when or what the circumstances might be, and really take that to heart. I think it can create a better feeling and appreciation for life. That's my belief.
Let's divert to another area about you. You draw.
I do. I draw. I don't draw as much as I paint. I'm an artist. I stuck one of my recent ones back here behind us. Anyway, I for a brief time, I was able to be for 4 years, I guess, I was able to be an art teacher at a school where I worked. That was great fun. And during this time of COVID-19, I have been painting and painting and painting. I think I've produced 25 new works of art during this time period. That's the most prolifically I've ever, it's really been since 2007 since I had done much painting. So I'm very happy. It's a time of joy for me. And I do draw some, but I prefer to draw with my paintbrushes. Yeah. So I don't know. I mostly do landscapes, but I also do some portraits and still life, but I'm mostly inspired by, mountains and skies and I love sunsets and sunrises and those sorts of things. Yeah.
Fantastic. Well, what else would you like to add about yourself?
I would like to tell about one more thing, and I hope this hasn't sounded all that commercial or whatever, but
Yeah, go ahead.
there's something about me that I don't know if I told you in my biography I shared. I have a brain tumor. It's not cancerous, but it's a serious brain tumor in that the location of it is, it needed attention. And the way I found out, I was losing vision in my right eye. It was like a dark curtain was coming up over my eye. So I ended up writing a book about that. So I'm going to show you the cover, because right on the cover is me, my cross section, and right behind my eye, I don't know if you can see it.
Yeah, you can see it.
Okay, that's the tumor right there.
Oh, yeah.
So it's a pretty big one. It's bigger than my eyeball, you know. The problem, the reason it was so serious is because it is right there, right next to the pituitary, and it's, you know, my sight eventually in both eyes would have likely been, you know, gone over time. So I had to make a decision. Was I going to get surgery, brain surgery, or was I going to have radiation treatments? You know, those are the main things offered to me. And it was very hard to make that decision because the surgery is a big one and it had serious side effects, you know, a pretty high chance of stroke or even death, you know. It was not an easy thing to decide. And I went to many different specialists. I saw 4 specialists in the United States, and I saw 2 or 3 here in Canada. And everybody had a different opinion, but since I was seeing surgeons, they were primarily encouraging me to have the surgery. Surgeons like to cut. They like to, you know, let's take it out, you know. And I have a physician brother, and he was encouraging me to get that thing out of there, you know. So the problem was, for me, I looked at those side effects, those potential side effects, and I just wasn't into it. So finally, I did decide on a surgeon here in Toronto. She was pretty amazing, and I said to her, "What would you do if you were in my shoes?" And she said, "I don't know what I would do, Julie." She said, "You have got to look at the different risks, the risks of not doing surgery and the risks of doing it, and then you've got to decide what you could live with." Well, I appreciated her so much. I ended up not having surgery. I ended up having the radiation treatments. Because for me, the very small chance of any side effects from that outweighed the rather larger chances with the procedures. And I'm fine. I have my vision I had 30 treatments. I had to go in every day for 30 days or 5 weeks or whatever. And, you know, I lost a little bit of hair, which grew back, you know. But that's it. There wasn't anything terrible I think I was more tired for a while, you know, from the radiation. But, you know, I didn't start speaking foreign languages or anything. Anyway, so nothing too, I didn't grow green ears, you know, nothing too goofy. And anyway, I don't mean to make light of it. What I did is, again, I thought, okay, this is another opportunity for me. I kept a journal through the whole process. And the journal was, you know, today I found this out, and then, you know, that, and this is how this feels. And, you know, so it's what did I do with the book? Oh, it's like a medium book. It's not tiny, and it's not, but it's got some funny parts, you know, because I like to make fun of myself, and it's, you know, it's some inspirational parts. I put in there some of my coping strategies, because, oh my gosh, was this ever a big decision to make, you know? So anyway, I've enjoyed being able to share that story, because for me it has a very good outcome, and I guess I finished the treatments in 2016, and I'm doing great. And this year, so once a year now, I have to get an MRI scan, and this year it actually showed a little bit of shrinkage. So the slower it shrinks, the better for me, because that means it's a slow growing tumor. So the less chance of it growing back. So anyway, that's a little more of my story. Anyway, I'm a strange person. I like to write about my own life, even I'm writing another book about my life that it's different. But anyway, yes, I think that I've learned so much through my experiences. So my husband died in March of 2018. My mother passed away last November, so November of 2019. She was 93 years old.
Wow.
And the last time I saw her was just amazing. She had some memory issues, but and so sometimes our meetings were with her asking the same question over and over, things like that, like kind of repetitive. But the last time I was with her, we had a profoundly touching engagement of, anyway, I will treasure that memory always. And so we can all learn and grow from death and dying, no matter what kind of situation it is. And I feel my 3 very close experiences of that have not been tragic, have not been traumatic. So my take on it is necessarily informed by my own experience. But I have a lot of compassion for people who have experienced traumatic death and tragic death, and especially death of their own children or grandchildren. That would be the hardest thing I can imagine. So
let me
I
ask
don't know,
you.
Nour, are you is there anything else you want to know about?
Yeah, I have a question here. Like,
okay.
Throughout all of your experience, what kind of let me say, what have you learned? What can you tell people about how to let's say improve these situations, or what should people do to be able to tackle these situations in suitable ways?
So like I said, this time of pandemic has really thrown a wrench, if you want to say it that way, into the whole situation of death and dying. Many people are now passing away while they're in hospital, in the ICU, or where they're not able to be with their loved ones at the time of death. So in my mind, that's not ideal, but it's what it is. My advice to anyone now would be, no matter what stage of life you're in, make sure that you have said the important things to the important people in your life, no matter what they might be. You might be thinking, well, I'm not going to talk about that till my last minute, or whatever. Don't save it up. You might not get to talk about it your last minute. And I don't know, I'm trying to imagine the circumstances. It would be very hard for me as a spouse or a child or whatever to be able to let go of my loved one, of my dying loved one, and know that they're not with me. I would prefer to be with them at the end. And if you can create the situation to be at home when your loved one is dying, for them to be at home, in my mind, that's ideal. So how do you set that up? There are things you can do to make sure that can happen. That was how I wanted it to occur with my late husband. But in the last day or two of his life, I needed help I needed somebody who could give him medication that I didn't have. So we ended up going to the hospital. I don't regret that. He needed that help, and I needed that support at the last, but I would have liked for him to be able to die in his own home, in our home. I think a lot of it, how to get ready, how to prepare. Think about, what it is that's most important to you. There are people who choose to write what's called legacy letters. So they write a letter that will be there for their loved one. Or maybe they write a series of letters, of cards. Let's say somebody's got a grandchild that's very precious to them, and they may write a birthday card. This is for you at the age of 9, the age of 10, for when you graduate high school. People who are approaching death do wonderful things like that their grandchild, their loved one, their spouse will remember always and cherish always. So those are some of the things people can do if they choose to. They might want to leave one letter to their whole family that maybe tells something about them. There's some people who have a life story that causes them so much pain, they're not able to tell it. They're not able to relate it face to face. Perhaps it's just such a painful memory, and they can't stand to talk about it. But maybe they could write it down. If they want that information to be passed on to their family, they could write the letter, explain what happened, whatever it was that, in their past, that they would like to be remembered, but they just weren't up to sharing that face to face. You can do that, so those are some suggestions that I would have for people. If at all possible, make all your choices about, how you want your body to be dealt with after you're dead. Do you want to be cremated? Do you want to be buried in a natural death cemetery? There are places that people can be buried without being in caskets. They're actually rolled in shrouds and buried in the ground. And some people feel very strongly about that. Others, would want to be buried right where their parents or their grandparents were. Things like that, those kinds of decisions can be made in advance, and people can, if they want to take care of all the details, they can buy their casket in advance. There are people who make their own caskets. There are caskets that people can get, that the family gets to decorate. They're, cardboard caskets. Mm-hmm. The family can decorate them. So there's all kinds of choices, and many of us don't realize what the choices are, but they're out there. And so I don't know. Those are things I would think of. So I'm just going to share my preference. I would like to be buried as a tree pod. So in Italy, right now, there's a company that makes what's called tree pods. And so they take the body and wrap it in a bundle and plant it in the ground and plant a tree on top of it. So in my mind, I don't even know if that may not be legal, in wherever I die. And so, might not get to happen. But for me, I think that's a wonderful. I would love to be a tree, so those are different things you might want to consider. I've heard people express very particular desires to, if they've been cremated, that their ashes be distributed in their garden or in their favorite lake or stream or, something like that. People make choices like that.
Yeah, like I have asked all my questions. Would you like to add something else?
No, I just, I appreciate the opportunity to be on your podcast. Is that what you call it?
A show.
On your show. And you're a very good interviewer. Thank you for asking me to participate. It was great fun. Thanks a lot. And I think I've said about everything there is to say.
It's my
If
honor.
people want to be in contact with me, I could give you that information.
Yeah, go ahead, please. Go ahead, please.
Oh, now?
Yeah.
Or,
say everything. If you have a website, if you have like an email, if you have all your contacts.
So Victoria and I have a website that's journeysandbooks.com. So that's it, journeysandbooks.com. And you can write to us at journeysandbooks@gmail.com. So that's our co-author email address. You can also probably Google me and it'll tell you 15 different ways to get a hold of me. That's, the more times you put things out there, that's what happens. Yeah. But that's probably the best way, journeysandbooks@gmail.com or the website. On the website, there are some blogs, so they might want to read some of the blog posts. Yeah. So anyway, thank you so much, Nour.
It has been a great pleasure talking to you, Julie. Thank you so much for your time and help, really, indeed.
You're very welcome. Thank you, and namaste to everybody.
Thank you.